There was no obstruction. In fact, the Mueller report, to the contrary of what these managers say today, came to the exact opposite conclusions of what they say. Let me quote from the House impeachment report at page 16. Although President Trump has in times invoked the notion of due process, an impeachment trial, an impeachment inquiry is not a criminal trial and should not be confused with it. Believe me, what has taken place in these proceedings is not to be confused with due process. Because due process demands, and the Constitution requires, that fundamental fairness and due process, we're hearing a lot about due process is designed to protect the person accused. When the Russia investigation failed, it devolved into the Ukraine. A quid pro quo. When that didn't prove out, it was then bribery or maybe extortion, or somebody said, one of the members or the members of the House said treason. But instead we get two articles of impeachment. Two articles of impeachment that have a vague allegation about a non-crime allegation of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Managers, right here, before you today, who have said that executive privilege and constitutional privileges have no place in these proceedings. On June 28, 2012, Attorney General Eric Holder became the first United States Attorney General to be held in both civil and criminal contempt. Why? Because President Obama asserted executive privilege. With respect to the Holder contempt proceedings, Mr. Manager Schiff wrote, "The White House assertion of privilege is backed by decades of precedent that has recognized the need for the President and his senior advisors to receive candid advice and information from their top aides." Indeed, that's correct. Not because Manager Schiff said it, but because the Constitution requires it. Mr. Manager Nadler said that the effort to hold Eric Holder, Attorney General Holder, in contempt for refusing to comply with various subpoenas was, quote, politically motivated, and Speaker Pelosi called the Holder matter, and I quote, a little more than a witch hunt. What are we dealing with here? Why are we here? Are we here because of a phone call? Or are we here before this great body because since the President was sworn into office, there was a desire to see him removed? I remember in the Mueller report, there were discussions about, remember, insurance policies. The insurance policy didn't work out so well. So then we moved to other investigations. I guess you would call it reinsurance or an umbrella policy. And that didn't work out so well. And here we are today. Manager Schiff quoted the Supreme Court, and I'd like to make reference to the Supreme Court as well. It was then Justice Rehnquist, later to be Chief Justice Rehnquist, who wrote for the majority in United States versus Russell in 1973. These are the words. "We may someday be presented with a situation in which the conduct of law enforcement agents is so outrageous that due process principles would absolutely bar the government from invoking judicial process to obtain a conviction. That day is today." That day was a year ago.
Begins extended proceedings based on a record that every person in this room and every American watching at home knows does not include documents and witness testimony. It should, because the President would not allow it to be so. Complying with these subpoenas would not impose a burden. The subpoenas cover narrowly tailored and targeted documents and witnesses that the President has concealed. The Senate deserves to see the documents from the White House, the State Department, the Office of Management and Budget, the Department of Defense. These agencies already should have collected and at least preserved these documents in response to House subpoenas. Indeed, in some cases, agencies have already produced documents in FOIA lawsuits, albeit in heavily redacted form. And witnesses with direct knowledge or involvement should be heard. That includes the President's acting Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, his former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, who has publicly offered to testify, two senior officials integral to implementing the President's freeze on Ukraine's military aid also have very relevant testimony. Why not hear it? Robert Blair, who serves as Mulvaney's senior advisor, Michael Duffy, a senior official at OMB, and other witnesses with direct knowledge that we reserve the right to call later, but these witnesses with whom we wish to begin the trial. Last month, President Trump made clear that he supported having senior officials testify before the Senate during his trial, declaring that he would love to have Secretary Pompeo, Mr. Mulvaney, now former Secretary Perry, and, quote, many other people testify in the Senate trial.
So, when it's fair, if it will be fair in the Senate, I would love to have Mike Pompeo, I'd love to have Mick, I'd love to have Rick Perry, and many other people testify.
The Senate has an opportunity to take the President up on his offer to make his senior aides available, including Mr. Mulvaney and Secretaries Perry and Pompeo. But now the President is changing his tune. The bluster of wanting these witnesses to testify is over, notwithstanding the fact that he has never asserted a claim of privilege during the course of the House impeachment proceedings. He threatens to invoke one now in a last-ditch effort to keep the rest of the truth from coming out. The President sends his lawyers here to breathlessly claim that these witnesses or others cannot possibly testify because it involves national security. Never mind that it was the President's actions in withholding military aid from an ally at war that threatened our national security in the first place. Never mind that the most impeachable serious offenses will always involve national security because they will involve other nations, and that misconduct based on foreign entanglement was what the framers feared most. The President's absurdist argument amounts to this: we must endanger national security to protect national security. We must make a President's conduct threatening our security beyond the reach of impeachment power if we are to save the presidency. This is dangerous nonsense. As justices of the Supreme Court have underscored, the Constitution is not a suicide pact. But let us turn from the abstract to the very concrete, and let me show you just one example of what the President is hiding in the name of national security. There is a document which the President has refused to turn over, in which his top diplomat in Ukraine says to two other appointees of the President, as I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign. The administration refuses to turn over that document and so many more. We only know about its existence. We have only seen its contents because it was turned over by a cooperating witness. This is what the President would hide from you and from the American people. In the name of national security, he would hide graphic evidence of his dangerous misconduct. The only question is, and it is the question raised by this resolution, will you let him? Last year, President Trump said that Article 2 of the Constitution will allow him to do anything he wanted. And evidently believing that Article 2 empowered him to denigrate and defy a co-equal branch of government, he also declared that he will fight all subpoenas. Let's hear the President's own words.
That obviously has not happened here. Senator McConnell did not consult at all with Senator Schumer on the contents of this text. I would imagine that Senator Schumer only got to see it probably around the same time that we did in the House. And the reason this was kept hidden is that it does not prescribe a process for a fair trial. And the American people desperately want to believe that the Senate will give both the President and the House of Representatives a fair trial. This resembles nothing like the Clinton proceeding. For the first point, in the Clinton case, if we're truly following the Clinton precedent, all of the documents were provided before the trial, more than 90,000 of them. Does this resolution provide for the president to provide the documents before the trial? No, it does not. It leaves that question of whether the House will ever see these documents, whether the American people will ever see these documents, to the end and only the end, with no guarantee that this material will ever be shown to the House or to the American people. That is a profound departure from the Clinton trial. Without the documents, you can't make important judgments about even which witnesses should be called or what questions should be asked of the witnesses when you do. So that is a profound departure from the Clinton precedent. On the subject of witnesses, it is also a deep departure from Clinton, where all of the witnesses testified before the Senate trial. The issue in the Clinton trial was not whether they would testify. They had testified already. They had been interviewed already, some dozens of times. The question in the Clinton trial was, will they be recalled? Will they be required to testify again? And that question was answered in the affirmative. Here, though, if we're following the Clinton precedent, all of these witnesses should testify, should be deposed before the trial begins, not after the trial is over. So this is not at all the model used in the Clinton case as well. This resolution even goes so far in another departure from the Clinton precedent to say they're not even going to admit the evidence that was received in the House, that they're going to even postpone the decision about whether any of the witness testimony will actually be part of the record. And finally, they are compressing the time of the trial. Whereas the Clinton trial, managers had 6 hours a day to present over a course of days, they're now presenting that we double the amount of time each day so that the proceedings can conceivably go well into the night when apparently Senator McConnell hopes the American people will not be watching. This is not a process for a fair trial. This is the process for a rigged trial.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the video